Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed your week so far, enjoyed your weekend. Today, we got a little bit of something interesting. We're going to be doing some general sound design advice, some walkthroughs on how to make different sounds and different synths. I already showed you guys how to do stuff in Serum and FM8. This is going to give you a better understanding of how to make different sounds specifically, as well as how you can carry that information over to other synths that aren't Serum or FM8. So let's get into it. As we have already explored the basics of some synths, let's now take a look at how we can design our own sounds in these synths with our ever-expanding audio knowledge as we develop and grow as musicians. Learning the basics of these techniques and the basics of some sound design can help you analyze sounds that you're trying to create, such as sounds made by your favorite artists like Marshmello, and help you get much closer to making your preferred sound much faster. There are a few main things you will need to focus on to create the sound you were looking for, so let's go over those first. The first thing you're going to focus on is the envelope. You may have heard this referred to before as ADSR, which is also called Attack, Decay, Sustain, Release. This is the general shape of your sound in terms of how loud it is, how long it is, and the different stages of volume it goes through as it plays. Is it a really short pluck? Does it have a little bit of body to it? Is it an evolving pad? These determine the lengths of the note and the lengths of the sound you're going to make, as well as help narrow in your critical listening what kind of sound you're trying to design, whether, again, if it's one that you've thought of in your head, or one that you're trying to make that's very similar to one that a favorite artist of yours has made. The second thing you're going to want to focus on is the range of the sound. Is it a mid-range sound? Is it a bass sound? Maybe that evolving pad takes up the whole spectrum of audio. Maybe it's a really high frequency lead. Maybe it's a really low subby bass. Figuring out in your head what range this instrument is sitting in is another crucial step to getting closer. You're not going to be able to make the sound that you want to make if you're playing it in the wrong range, or if your oscillators are set to the wrong octaves. This all sounds really basic, but if you're just starting out like I was, this can go over your head a little bit, and you might end up not being able to make the sounds you want to make as fast as you want to. And the last final thing you're going to want to focus on is the actual tone of the sound itself. This is a little bit harder to describe because this is where the actual creativity of who you are as an artist and what you're trying to make comes in. This can be described in multiple things, such as the waveforms you're using, what types of synthesis you're using to create it, the effects you add in. Do you add a filter? Do you add in FM synthesis? Do you add in distortion? What in your head have you heard will help add the qualities to this sound that you're trying to add? Is the sound you're trying to make distorted? Can you hear that distortion, or can you hear that compression? Can you hear that EQ, or do you think that EQ might be necessary? This part is usually up for debate because this is the creative aspect, and what you're trying to create is really yours in the end, and it has to be yours in the end. If you try and make something exactly like what your favorite artist made, it's not really your sound anymore. But those are sort of the three basic things you really need to focus on when using any synth. I always recommend starting with envelope. It is the first thing you will need to focus on when making your sound, because if you don't zero in the correct envelope and get that all locked in, you won't quite be able to design your sound as easily as you think. Zeroing in on the correct envelope already gives you half your sound. And it is very simple to do. Once you are familiar with the basics of making the correct envelope for your sound, the rest of your sound designing ventures become 10 times easier, believe me. Is it a pluck? Is it a sustain? Does it have a bit of release at the end? Does it hold for a little bit? Does it have that sustaining in the body? Are you trying to make a pad? Perhaps a slower attack and a bit of release at the end will work great. And adding in a slow changing envelope can add a lot of interest to your sound if you're making something like a pad. Is it a pluck? Tighten up the sustain and release and make your attack very, very short. For example, if you're working in Serum and you want to make a pad, maybe just give it a little bit of attack, a little more than normal, and add in some release. Already, just because of the envelope, we already have half of our sound. Are you trying to make a really fast pluck? Like I said, you're going to want to tighten up the envelope, tighten up the release a little bit, and just get rid of that decay length, because that is not going to give you anything of what you want when you're making a pluck. And we already have the super fast plucky sound. Once you have the general shape of your sound nailed down, now all you need to figure out is the range of the sound. If you're making a high-end lead, make sure you're using higher notes on your keyboard, or you're upping the octaves in your oscillators. Are you making a powerful bass instead? Exact same thing, but backwards. You want to use either the lower octaves of your keyboard, or you want to pitch these octaves down if you're working on a smaller keyboard and just can't use those lower octaves. And if you are making a bass, I always recommend layering a nice sub at the bottom. Helps give you some nice characteristics, and play with the waveforms just a little bit. And you already have a nice basic bass. Now, what if you're making something more full range, like a supersaw? Now, in that case, you can't necessarily do it with a couple oscillators like in Serum or Massive or FM8. For something like a supersaw, you're actually going to need a few different synth instances, and you're going to need to add in a few different layers at different ranges. But you're going to want to make sure that each range has its own characteristics, its own tone, its own envelope, and its own style. That's very important for making something that sounds like a full range sound. And once you have the range nailed down, you've already got the envelope nailed down. Now you're just down to tone. Now this is where you can get creative and do whatever you want to do to make the sound your sound. You can add in your LFOs. You can add in your distortion. You can play with the waveforms. You can play with the modulation. You can do whatever you want. It is the most vague thing to describe and the hardest thing to explain, as it comes down to experience as well as intuition. However, adding in things like unison will make your sound more wide. It will make it sound like there's multiple instances of that sound playing at once, which will give it a nice pad feel. Distortion and compression will add a lot of character to your sound. Filters will take out any unwanted frequencies. And other processing units will help you get the sound you need with some extra power and clarity. If you are not familiar with various effects, I highly recommend going back on my channel and looking at the videos right there, because those will help you greatly understand how some of these effects work. And then once you're all done, it just comes down to some polishing. You've made your sound. To show you how these can all be applied to different synths, I'm going to show you guys some of this in Massive, because Massive isn't a synth we've covered on the channel yet, and making something or anything can be attributed to just those three things: envelope, range, and tone. So to start, let's say we're going to make a really fast pluck. I like making plucks. They're fun to make. We're going to tighten up the attack. We're going to tighten up the decay a little bit, maybe give it a little bit of release. And this is what our envelope sounds like already. Now we just want to set the range. Now, we've basically already made a lead pluck. How about a bass pluck? Let's set the range down a bit. We can take the pitch and we can turn it down a couple octaves. Or we can set it back up to 0 and just use the lower ranges of our keyboard to help finalize in the sound as we move on and focus on the actual tone. And now let's focus on the tones. Say I want it to be a little softer. Well, let's add in a low pass filter, put the cutoff a little bit. And now it's not quite as harsh, but say we want to add in some characteristics. Let's get another oscillator going, turn it up, and see what we can add. Do we want to maybe add in some character, add in some distortion? Well, we can do that on the effects over here. In Massive, I personally like using the Teletube. We can even add in white noise to increase the character. We'll put it through the same filter. We'll add some color. And then we can even add in an LFO. Let's say we add one to the cutoff and give it just a little bit of character. We can even map the envelope here and really make it just a little interesting. That's really all there is to it. Envelope, range, and tone. You've already got everything you need to make any sound you want in the world. Now you just need a synth. So I hope you guys found this useful and informative as always. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'm more than happy to elaborate on any details or make a follow-up video if I get a lot of questions that aren't covered in this original video. So enjoy the rest of your week, guys. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Bye-bye.